name's Brandon. Today I'm going to be talking about the importance of high school concussions in football. This topic has recently exploded in coaching groups and also medical groups around the nation that are associated with football. The reason for this is because in 2008, a neuropathologist for the city of Pittsburgh named Bennett Omalu was doing an autopsy on a former professional football player, Mike Webster. He played a position in football that was one of the more prominently hit. He was the center, so he was taking hits to the head almost every single play for, I think, 11 years was his total career. And while he was performing his autopsy, he discovered that Mike had suffered a heart attack. And Mike had no previous cardiac issues, so he was tasked with figuring out what happened. And when other neuropathologists just decided that it was a heart attack and it was nothing else, he decided to cut into the brain to figure out what was going on. On the outside, Mike's brain looked healthy, like it normally would for a 50-year-old man, but on the inside, it looked similar to what you would expect to see in a brain of a war veteran that had seen multiple combat instances. So after he had found this, the medical term for what was found was chronic traumatic encephalopathy. This is a neuropathological disease that basically just gets worse and worse and has symptoms that are similar to Parkinson's disease. So you'll get the loss of body movement, so you'll be experiencing really erratic muscle tremor type things, and then you'll also get memory loss, confusion, nausea, vomiting, and similar things. And so when Bennett found this, he went to the NFL medical board and basically scared off all their executives, because that would be huge for the sport of football, that if they found that this degenerative disease was linked to football, that kids would stop playing, and basically they thought their sport would dissipate. So after they had talked about it, he was widely dismissed, except for a few people that weren't in the football league. And so what really happened with his observations of Mike Webster really didn't have anything to do with the NFL, because they widely dismissed it, but other research groups around the nation had decided that it's worthwhile to try and figure out what is causing this disease. And then one big question was why everybody, well, not everybody, a lot of people in the sport suffers concussions, and one of the big issues was they didn't know which concussions would cause this disease. And so they also found a problem with how to categorize the severity of diseases, because right now the only way to figure out or diagnose a concussion is you ask simple questions like, do you remember what happened? What's your name? What city are you in? What team are you playing against? And things like that. So the research groups set up observed studies all around the nation, all around the country. The government also did this. And what they did was they took a certain amount of high school football players with different medical backgrounds. So 1 concussion, no concussions, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And they tested them for like memory recognition, color recognition, and things like that, and tried to see if there were any cognitive impairments from right after they got a concussion, or if it was the same. So they would test them before the season, test them after the season, and if they did think they suffered a concussion, they would test them immediately after the hit and 15 days after the hit using ANOVA tests and different things. Every research that I had gone through, they all said that there were no definitive evidence saying that concussions are causing this cognitive inability, but it did lead to the research questions as how to better diagnose concussions. This is still a huge issue. Like I said, it's just generic questions that diagnose concussions now, but with that being said, they do need to understand how concussions are, what happens during the impact of a concussion. So many people think that concussions are just contusions on the brain or bruises on the brain, which isn't false. But when the impact, or when the head impacts the ground or impacts anything hard, the brain does smack against the wall, leaving a bruise. But the big issue is the shearing forces. And shearing forces are when two forces are oriented in different directions and basically try to rip the fabric. So you have these two forces going through the brain, ripping the fabric or the brain tissue. And since the brain has the consistency of gelatin, basically, you can imagine that the forces don't have to be very massive. Another issue is that the forces necessary to rip the brain tissue aren't known, and also if the brain tissue is ripped or torn all the way, they don't know if it'll be able to repair itself. This is because of the lack of blood flow. So as you can see, as you can imagine, the common consensus for these researchers were that they need to be able to better evaluate and also produce some sort of procedure to reduce the amount of concussions that are being suffered by high school students.